Today's daf is daf Zayin. We're actually up to daf Zayin on the base. We finished the sugya about the leprosy, and now we're going back to Tumah. The first two prokim of Masechta Shavuos is all about Tumah. So just quickly as a preamble, so we'll understand the Gemara going forward. Tumah. If somebody is tamei and entered the Beis Hamikdash, or somebody is tamei and ate karbanos, if he did it deliberately, he's chayiv mis. If you did it inadvertently, you have a very special carbon. In contrast to all the other karbanos chatois, you bring an animal. In this case here, you bring a carbon oil commensurate to what you can afford: animal, bird, or flower offering. And the number of scenarios. And basically, the Mishnah told us as follows: that in order to be chayiv a carbon, different to all other Avedas, you had to know prior to your Aveda that you did, b'shegig, that this was actually wrong. In other words, you knew that this was Tamei, you knew that you were Tamei, and then you forgot. Because it hasn't possibly hu yada or venelim that you once knew and you forgot. All other Avedas, you ate treifa fats by mistake. You had no idea that this was treifa before you ate it, but after you ate it, suddenly you became aware that that b'shegig you ate treifa fats, you bring a carbon chatas. But when it comes to Tumah, there had to be a yediyah in the beginning. You had to know that you were tummy, and then you forgot. Then you entered the Beis Hamikdash not knowing, or you entered the Karbanos, and then you became aware again. So there was a yediyah, a helam, a yediyah. That is the din when you say you have to bring a carbon. What happens if there was a yediyah in the beginning? You knew you were tummy, you forgot, and you didn't become aware. You just didn't have the idea at the end. So then we say that the carbon they brought in the Beis Hamikdash on Yom Kippur, the seir hanasa b'fnim, that goat that was sprinkled inside, that goat was matame, as a pasuk says, and we'll discuss this pasuk in detail in this whole Gemara. That goat atoned for that kind of a tumah, because it says metumis v'chipar al kodesh, it'll atone for you. So in a case where there's a yediyah, you forgot and you just didn't become aware, Yom Kippur will take care of it. What do you mean Yom Kippur? To what extent? What happens the day after Yom Kippur? Suddenly you remembered, oh yeah, I was tummy. You no longer bring a carbon? Of course you do. So all Yom Kippur can achieve, it cannot be a substitute for the carbon that you need to bring. Any time that you chayiv a carbon, a bar carbon, you need to eventually bring the carbon. We'll learn all about this in Gemara Krisis. But what you have to then do is, we say Yom Kippur is toiler. Yom Kippur suspends the Easter until you become aware. What exactly it means, Rabbi will later on tells the Gemara that any punishment that is due to you will not happen at all. According to another Amoida, it means that you'll be, if you died before you had a chance to become aware, you did it and you need a carbon, the Misa, then Yom Kippur retrospectively will become your atonement for that error. So the Seir Hanasa B'fnim is for a case where you knew in the beginning, but you didn't know then. So you're chayiv a carbon. What about a case where you did not know in the beginning? You didn't know you were tamei, and you went into the Beis Hamikdash, and then there was a helam all along, and then you had a idea at the end. There's no carbon at all. You don't bring there's no carbon, there's no chi of carbon. So what do you do in that case there? Then we say the seir hanasa bechutz, the carbon they brought outside in the outer mizbeach, that atones for that case. You're not chayiv a carbon at all because you didn't have idea in the beginning. But since the fact is you were tamei, you entered the Beis Hamikdash, or you ate a carbon, and then you became aware of it, you're not chayiv a carbon. So what's your forgiveness? Yom Kippur. But which animal of Yom Kippur? Not the goat that was brought, sprinkled inside. It was the seir nasa b'chutz on the outer mizbeach, and they did a normal sprinkling. That took care of that. What happens if there was no yediyah in the beginning and no yediyah at the end? You had no idea you were tamei. Then that's where the carbon musaf they brought on Yom Tov, and according to Tanakama, also the carbon of Chodesh took care of that. So if you became tummy between one Rosh Chodesh and the next, between Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, that the carbon musa they brought took care of all the tumas. According to Rashi and Yochai, you know that's only the carbon of Yom Tov took care of that. And what did the carbon of Rosh Chodesh take care of? If you knew you were tummy, but you didn't realize that was Chodesh. You were tired, but you ate a tumadic carbon, and in that case there, the carbon of the Chodesh takes care of that. So that's the Gemara. Now the Gemara is going to work out how do we know all this. So we're up to Zayin on the base, on the about 6 lines on the top of the page. He's quoting the Mishnah, 7 lines. Yes, but if you knew in the beginning, but you did not become aware afterwards, then seir hanasa b'fnim. Then the goat that was done in the inner Mishkan, inner Beis Hamikdash, no, they sprinkled the blood on the pareches or by badi aron. That's what took care of it. Of that, so the only time to get rid of it is a D in the beginning, so you're chayiv a carbon, but then you forgot and you never became aware again. So you never brought your carbon. So what does Yom Kippur achieve? It cannot compensate you for the carbon. It can be toilet. It suspends that no yisurim will befall you. So anyway, Tanaban we learned, and the Gemara is going to analyze this pasuk in great detail in Manusha. The pasuk says, the chiper al hakodesh, that this animal is going to atone for kodesh mitumais b'nei Yisrael, from the tumah of the Eden. So obviously, the seir that's done in the inside is there to alleviate an avera that deals with tumah. It's associated with tumah. How do we know which one? How do we know which case of tumah we're talking about? The Mishnah decided we're talking about a case where there's a big D in the beginning and no yediyah then. How do you know? Okay, now very important. The pasuk continues, so I'll just quote you a little bit further in the pasuk. You'll understand the Gemara. It says in the pasuk, "Umi pish am ulechol chatoisim." Pish am means deliberate averis, mazid. The kol chatoisim means inadvertent. Like a shaygig. Generally, that's what it means. A shaygig. So we are going to equate the two. That this carbon is going to take care of those carbonas that sort of you need to bring a carbon, but you can't bring a carbon. No, on the one hand, you're like a pesheya, someone does it liberally, there's no carbon involved at all. On the other hand, it has to be able to turn into a carbon. So we know that it cannot be talking about bemazed. It cannot be talking about a case where you had no knowledge in the beginning because it'll never turn into a carbon. It can only be talking about a case where you had knowledge in the beginning. So right, you could bring to a carbon, but if you know that you did, if you found it afterwards and you have to bring a carbon, your kippur doesn't do anything. And it's talking about, but you're not bringing a carbon like a pesheya because you're not aware. You just don't know that you're chayiv. That you didn't find out afterwards. Machlekes are shaynim. Why do you need a yediyah at the end? Very interesting. According to Rashi, we had before, the reason why you need a yediyah at the end is because if you don't remember, then how are you going to bring a carbon? It's a practical problem. Not a legal problem, but a practical problem. If you don't know after you walked in the Beis Hamikdash, you never reminded yourself, oh, I was tamei, then how are you going to bring a carbon? Practically. Other Rishonim learn, no, that it's that second yediyah that triggers the carbon. It's not only a practical problem, it's a legal problem as well. Okay, something about it further. Yes, I can think of 3 different tumas that the pasuk might be talking about. For example, maybe Tumas Avodah Zarah, maybe Yom Kippur will atone for the Tumah of Avodah Zarah, or maybe Tumas Gila Arayis, maybe Yom Kippur will atone for the Tumah of Gila Arayis, right? If you committed a sin of incest or one of those, or debauchery, but Tumas Shvichas Damim, because each one of them, as the Gemara will quote right now, it says the word Tumah. For example, it says clearly in the pasuk, I don't want you to do avodah zarah because if you will, leman you. No, it's talking about the moilech. And you remember we had a whole discussion moilech, and which is also in the parsha we're reading this week. That moilech is that you would actually machlek is what moilech is in the Shonim, but generally Rashi most learned is that moilech is you would take a child and put it between the two fires on both sides, and you walk across, or you gave it to a kohen to walk, one of their priests to walk across. And remember, Rashi says there's like Purim, they should jump, they actually leapfrog or jump over a certain section of Moilech. We had a machlek gemara there whether the problem is avodah zarah, this is some kind of avodah zarah, or whether it's b'chukaseim loy seleichu. Here we're learning that Moilech is avodah zarah because we're using this particular pasuk, and it says in the pasuk there, I don't want you to do this in Moilech because why? Because leman timei es migdashi, you're going to contaminate my migdash. Okay, it says tamei, so maybe that's what the Yom Kippur will atone for. Or Gila Reis, we find a Gila Reis, who Aimed it says, Ushmartim is Mishmarti, you should be careful. It talks about in the subject of Gila Reis. Don't make sure that you don't do any abomination. Don't follow the way the abominable ways. And then it says in the end of the pasuk, tamu but you should not become defiled by that. Tumah. Says, I don't want you to commit murder because you're going to sully the land. So how do I know it's not going on any of these tumas? Tais already asked. If you want to list tumas, there's so many more tumas. Why highlight these 3? So Taisus and the Ritva and others' answer is that these 3, of course, we mean all tumas, but these 3 is even a bigger chiddush. The Torah uses the word tamei. You don't become tamei if you do any of these things. Legally, if you commit avodah zarah and then you walk. True, but that's only one. But yeah, right, exactly. The point is that Mahatoida, we're using the word tummy in a spiritual sense, not in a legal sense. And so maybe that's the Chiddush Yom Kippur. Real tumah, you got to do whatever you have to do. But over here, because the Torah says that, Kippur Amatumas, and the Torah usually word tummy for these things, and maybe that's what the Torah is referring to. Other answers that these are stricter Avedas than all other Avedas. These are the three. The three you have to be Yarag or Yavar. You have to be prepared to die for. But Zara, Gilarosh, Chazamim. So maybe these three, only Yom Kippur can take care of. Maybe. Okay, then the Bryce continues. Yachla would have thought Al Gimel Tumas Allah Yesem Mechaper. Maybe these three. That's what this ear is coming to atone for. Tamalayim, it says Metumais. It says opposing Metumais Bnei Yisrael, because it says from the Tumas, not all the Tumas. So which tumas does it cover? It's not going to cover all the tumas in Kippur. Only one of them. Which one? The one that is different than all other tumas. Because we're going to allow Yom Kippur to atone, that means that we are lenient. Where do we find that we are lenient with tumah? As the Gemara will explain later on, only by the tumah that we're talking about in our Mishnah. Your tumah, you enter Beis. What's the leniency? The type of carbon you bring. All other avelis you do, it's a fixed carbon. Like I got to bring an animal. Here suddenly we say, look, you can't afford it, bring a bird. You can't afford that, bring flour. That's a leniency. Once we introduce a leniency by this particular kind of tumor, so maybe that's when your kippur also, takes over. From the tumas, not all the tumas. Where do we find, which of the tumas do we find the Torah is more lenient with tumas mikdash? Only in this case of tumah. David Abiyah says that's how we know that when the says Yom Kippur is coming to atone, it's only for the tumah of kodesh and mikdash. Right? You walked in the base mikdash or you ate kodesh while you were tummy. Rab Shimon says, I don't need to make all these cheshbainis. You look at the pasuk itself, you can see clearly that it's talking about tumas mikdash kedushav. It says, "V'chiper al hakodesh," you will forgive on the kodesh. Metumas, it says what kodesh metumas from tumah, and we're talking about tumah of what, of kodesh. So that's what we're talking about. I don't have to make any drushes. The Gemara later on explain what's the machlekes Rabbi Yehuda. So Metumas shall kodesh. Yochel, I would have thought, okay. Tumas or Kodesh. Which one? Remember, there's all kinds of scenarios. One is you had a Yedi in the beginning, a Yedi at the end, which you have to bring a carbon. Maybe that's what Yom Kippur takes care of. Then you have a case, you have a Yedi in the beginning and no Yedi at the end, which is what we actually learned. That's what it takes care of. But there's another case we had no Yedi in the beginning, but a Yedi at the end. Maybe that's what Yom Kippur, the Seir Hanasa B'Fnim, not Yom Kippur, Seir Nasa B'Fnim takes care of. Or you have a case we have no Yedi at all. Maybe that's, how do you know which one of these four cases is what Yom Kippur, the Seir Hanasa B'Fnim, the inner goat, that's the one that takes care of it. So the Gemara, so the pasuk continues and it says, we're talking about a shagig, which is similar to a pesha. Pshia, you don't bring a carbon. So too, the chatas, we're talking about in a case where there's no carbon involved, which means if you had a yedi in the beginning and a yedi at the end, where you have to bring a carbon, Yom Kippur cannot supplant that carbon. Just like there's no carbon, there's no carbon. Okay, so I've eliminated that, but there's still three other scenarios: a yedi in the beginning with no yedi at the end, or no yedi in the beginning and yedi at the end. How do you know which one it is? How do you know? This is what our Mishnah states. That we said that if there was yedi in the beginning, so you chayiv a carbon. But there was no Yedi B'Seif, so practically speaking, you're not going to bring one, or legally you're not going to bring one because you don't know. How do you know that that's the case, that the Seir Hanasa B'Fnim is taken care of and is toilet and suspends? Maybe it eliminates the other case where you had no Yedi in the beginning, but a Yedi at the end, so there's no carbon there, and Yom Kippur is mechaper. The Seir Hanasa B'Fnim is doing the kapara on that. How do you know which case, which scenario? She says that toilet tamleim, because you know why? How do we know? Because it says l'chol chatosim. On the one hand, we compare chatos to pashia, that there's no carbon. On the other hand, we say the word chatos to tell you, but it should be a carbon. Must be the only case where the scenario which should be a carbon, but there's no carbon is there's Yedi in the beginning, but there's no Yedi at the end. That's what the Brisa says, the first half of the Brisa. Let's understand. Yes, I would have introduced three different tumas. Tumas Avodah tumas Gilarayas, tumas Shvichas Damim. Let's go through each one of them. I would have thought that Yom Kippur takes care of it. Takes care is mechaper. Let's go through. Hi Avodah Zarah. What's exactly the case of Avodah Zarah? Even Mazid, if it was deliberate, Bar Kutolu, who'll get killed. I mean, Kippur is going to say you don't get killed anymore in Bezin? Unheard of. He's Chayiv Misa. Navas, B'Shaygig. No, if it's B'Shaygig, Bar Karbanu. And you just said before that if you have a chiv of a carbon, Yom Kippur cannot substitute for that. So what would you think? Which case would you say, oh, Yom Kippur is mechaper by Avodah Zarah? What scenario? So I'll give you two scenarios. Either b'mezid v'loy asabei, a mezid, but there was no hasar whatsoever. So the Shem will ask if it mazid and there's no warning, so we're not going to kill you. So it's not shaykh to carbon. You just said that the reason why it says chatois and pshoim, it has to be shaykh to carbon, but you're not bringing a carbon. If you've been mazid, what kind of carbon is there? So the Shem answer, some Shem answer, that other than different answers, that when we're asking these tumas, we don't mean to say exclude the tumah of Kodesh and Mikdash. We're saying make sure maybe Sin Azafrim takes care of walking the base of Mikdash while you come in and all that, but also in addition these also, and therefore why is the Torah use the word chatas that has to be shy the carbon is referring to Kodesh and Mikdash, not every single scenario. That's one possibility. The other one is that what happens that he was a shaygig and he had no idea that he did an Aveira. And Yom Kippur is Toilah until you become aware. When you're aware, you bring a Karmachatas. Okay, so therefore, that's what we would have thought. Let's go through the next one. You said Gila Royes. No, not Mechid. What's the case over there? Ibn Mezid, the same question. Ibn Mezid, Baktolu, gets killed. And Ibn Shagig, Bar Carbon, who is Shagig brings a carbon. So we answered B'mezid, L'asabeh. B'mezid, and there was no warning. Same thing. Or B'shagig, V'les Yadabeh. Shagig, he's no carbon because he had no idea. So Yom Kippur at least should be Toilah to suspend any punishment that's due to him. Shvichas Dami Nami, when it comes to murder, Heichi Dami, when it comes to murder, what are we talking about? Ibn Mezi Baktola gets killed. Ibn Shagig Bagolusu, and if it's B'Shagig, he's a Bagolus. B'Shagig here, there's no carbon at all. So not even shaykh to carbon. How does the Gemara think that you? Because if you remember, we had a big machlekes in Gemara in Makkos, sort of steer in the Gemara Makkos between the Beis and later in the test, whether the purpose of Golus is kapara or punishment. The Ritva learns one way, and the Marsha actually has a long Ritva learns another way, and other Shayim, and the Shayim as well. So the Gemara thinks right now, the Gemara at least is thinking, the whole union of a carbon is kapara, and Golus is a kapara. It's the same thing. That's like about carbon. That's like the carbon of somebody kills B'Shagig is Golus. So the Gemara answers, I'll tell you the scenario we're talking about here. The Mezil last way, there's no warning, and B'Shagig he didn't know about it. So that's what we would have thought. Or Inami, when it comes to Golus, I can say, Bahanach, there are certain incidences we killed somebody B'Shagig, but the Labine goes in it, but there's no Golus there. So you don't have, you don't bring a carbon. For example, if you're going up the ladder, the guy popped his head out after you threw the ball, or after you took the axe and hit the tree, and the thing went flying, and then suddenly the guy put his head out there and he got hit, he got struck. And we learned before, according to Montana, that you're not chayiv. Let's analyze the Braisa. I would have thought that these three tumas are soish mechaper tamalayim, mid tumas were like called tumas, only some, not all of them. Because what do we find? Where do you find tumah different? One tumah that the Torah treats differently than all other ones, but tumah's migdash kadosha. We find, where the tumah's migdash and the tumah's kodesh is different than all other tumahs. How? Afkan is more explain right now. Afkan but migdash my cholak. In what way is it different? The maisi oile b'yoyed. So now the Gemara is going to ask a question. First of all, other tumas also have differences. For example, Avodah Zarah. How is it different? All other karmachatas, you have a choice, a goat or a sheep. So you'll buy whichever is cheaper. But by Avodah Zarah, you must have a goat. And what happens is more expensive. If there's a shortage of goats, you'll pay a lot more money. So it's different. So maybe that's the difference. Let's say you only can bring a goat. By Avodah Zarah, you only bring a goat. So maybe that's a difference. And that's what the Torah is saying that the kippur takes care of. The Maisi Se'idah, like his, but you bring a goat and not a sheep. But I've kind of said, Anan Chalak L'Hakimi. What's the kippur doing? It's lenient. Don't worry about it. Your kippur will take care of it. So this is a kula. So where do you find, by which tumah do you find that the Torah is lenient with? You know where you find Torah lenient with? By tumas migdash, with tumas kodesh. What you see that you don't have to bring the full carbon. You can bring according to how much you can afford. That's a leniency. But here you're telling me they're being machmir. If you have there's no sheep around and there's a shortage of goats. Well, even though you sheep around, sorry, there's a shortage of goats. You have to pay more money. It's a chumrah. Okay, now we're going to go through a number of cases which you also bring a carbon oil of the yared, and maybe that's what the Torah is talking about. There's a woman that gives birth. A woman gives birth. We read in the last week's parsha, she has to bring a carbonus after the 80 days or after the 40 days, depending on the boy or girl. So the cholok, the ma'ase oil of the yared, her carbon, depending on, she brings two carbonus, an oil and a chatas, but her chatas there is also oil of the yared, commensurate. It says the pasuk l'chol chat toisam. It says in the pasuk for their sin. There she's tamei. There's no sin there. Her chatz is not her sin. She is tamei, and therefore she has to bring a carbon. Sorry, in the pasuk when it says that Yom Kippur will atone, it says what will atone for pishayim and chatoisim for a sin. What sin did she do that she gave birth? No sin. So obviously it's not included. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Why taka does she bring a carbon chatz? We're going to learn in the Gemara Nida another place. Why do you bring a chatz? Or Rab Shimon Yochai, he says Yeledis nami chaytasi. Rab Shimon Yochai says that a Yeledis no why brings a chatz because she's in the way she sins because she makes us a vow. She's so much pain that she says, "Oh, I'll never have children again." So therefore, that's what the carbon is. So there is an element of chattas here, even though it's also to allow her to be able to eat carbonates again because she was tummy. But there's an element of chattas here. Ma'ik, what are you going to say? Gemara says not a problem. Rab Shimon Tamei. Rab Shimon is consistent with his view. Remember, Rab Shimon doesn't learn from the pasuk of Kol Chatoisim. Rab Shimon says in the pasuk v'chiper ala kodesh metumas. So I know the pasuk directly tells you that the carbon seir hanasa b'fnim on Yom Kippur is there only for tumah, not for your lettuce. So don't worry about it. Okay, the Gemara said, what about Mitzayra? Mitzayra brings a number of kabbanas, but his carbon chattas is also commensurate oil of the yared. So maybe that's what Yom Kippur coming to atone. Now, when it comes to your lettuce, Rashi learns what the Gemara is trying to say is, Gemara's last question is, that a woman, after the 40 or 80 days, she brings a carbon chattas, maybe Yom Kippur completely eliminates the carbon. Then now that you went through Yom Kippur, you don't have to bring a carbon chattas. And many Rishonim have a problem with that because the Gemara is saying that you have to be potential to bring a carbon, and here you no potential at all. So they learned the case of Yoledes giving birth as a case where she gave birth, but we're not sure whether it was a nafil, a miscarriage, or it was actually an embryo, or there was nothing there at all. And we can't locate it, can't find it. She didn't know she was pregnant, so you can't follow the rules of majority because it's a suffix. It's like that the Yom Kippur should be able to eliminate it, but it's still shaykh to a carbon. Normally she could bring a carbon because you bring a chatas oif on a suffix, but over here Yom Kippur maybe eliminates it. Next question is Mitzayra. So what about Mitzayra? Bring a carbon over here. Maybe that's what Yom Kippur takes care of. And now we can go back to the community. Again, it says the pasuk for a sin. Mitzayra didn't do a sin. It's not his fault. He got sick, and therefore. It says Al Shiva Dvarim Negoim Baim. The 7 different sins we'll have in more Erchan Tezvav. There are 7 sins. The first one that we all are familiar with, and that is Lashon Hara. Mitzvah is Meitzira, but there are other sins as well: stealing, murder, being arrogant, and interesting. The last one is Sarei Ayin, being stingy. In fact, there's a fascinating Sefer Chassidim. I think it's tough Reish Pei Beis, where the Sefer Chassidim says that when you take money from other people to invest in your business, or whatever, take money from other people, if that person, or also Ayin Hey, if that person is stingy, I think maybe it's tough Reish Ayin Hey, if that person is stingy, then the person's money is tainted and tarnished. And if you take that money and use it as well and mix it with your money, in let's say some business investment, it's going to ruin your own money as well, and you'll never succeed. It's called Sarei Ayin, somebody who does not fargin, does not have any joy from seeing someone else benefit. He wants to have all the benefit for himself. Very narcissistic. Anyway, so what do we see from here? That there is a sin involved. So maybe that's what the Torah says Yom Kippur takes care of is a mitzvah. So we answer very simply. You did a sin, but you know what the atonement for the sin is? Not the karma chattas you bring it then. The atonement for the sin is the tzaras itself. the very leprosy that you had. The carbon chatas is after the leprosy is over, you're atoned. Now you want to be able to resume eating from carbonis again, from kachim. So you have to bring, and you want to go be able to join the fold. You right now you were sitting in quarantine. You want to be able to go back to the people. So you bring a carbon chatas. So the chatas there is not to atone. And our pasuk says called chatosim. So we know obviously we're not talking about a mitzvah. The nega is atones. The carbon is to be called. The purpose of the call of the carbon is to bring you back, invite you back into the community. Okay, the similar thing. A nazir. If the nazir, let's say, counts 10 days, suddenly he touches a dead body, becomes tamei. The din is he has to start all over again. But first he has to get out of his tumah. He has to bring a carbon chatas, and that carbon chatas is also. He brings an Asham as well, but let's focus on the Chatas. Is an oil of the Yidid. Maybe that's what they were saying on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur takes care of that. They Nazir, Tommy, another Tommy. The Cholak, and we find over there also leniency. What's the leniency there? Not oil of the Yidid. The leniency there is he doesn't have to bring an animal in the first place. Everybody brings only birds. The Ma'asit Taidim and a Yaina. He brings doves, pigeons. He brings birds. So there's a leniency there. Maybe the Torah says Yom Kippur, okay, takes care of it. What you said, it says the apostle Chataysa for sinners. The Nazir is not a sinner, so therefore it can't be talking about a Nazir. But that the Nazir is Tameh. That's the problem. He's Tameh and he wants to kickstart again his Naziris, so therefore he has to go through this process. So it's nothing to do with the fact that it's not a chatas for a sin, and that's why we're not talking about it in Kippur. The Kippur says, what does it expiate? Only those averis to do with Tumah. The Gemara, what about according to Rabbi Kappa? That's quoted everywhere. We had it a number of times. Not only in Gemara Nazir, but we also had it in the Durham. We also had it in Tainus. He holds a Nazir as a sinner. Why is he a sinner? Because he's denying himself the luxury of this world. The Rebbe should put us in this world not to be angels, but to be humans and to elevate the world around us. And this person's mitzayir atzum min hayayin. The Rebbe gave us a blessing of wine, and this person denies himself having any wine. So there's a sin involved for doing that. And so if there's a sin involved, so why do you only bring a carbon chatas if you became tamei? Even if you didn't become tamei, you bring a carbon chatas. So the way Tosis and others learn is that the sin is that you extended your times. One thing you did once, but here you became tamei, and now you have to start all over again in Naziris. And now the sin became much more concrete. So the chayda there's a sin involved. So why maybe if Kippur is coming to expiate that sin. So he holds like Rab Shimon because he holds like Rab Shimon that we're not learning from the pasuk of Metumas. He learns the pasuk itself. The pasuk says the Chipur al HaKodesh Metumas. Directly, the pasuk says that the only thing that it is mechaper is mechaper on. The only thing that's mechaperin is mechaper on the kodesh, on people who become tamei. It's only mechaper on a person who was tamei and he forgot and went into the base major ate a carbon. So therefore, don't talk to me about nazir, don't talk to me about tzara because we're learning from that pasuk. We'll stop over here and we'll continue tomorrow.